Tonight, we begin a long journey, a journey into the heart of ancient China, into a time of emperors and poets, of swords and silk, into the story of the Tang Dynasty. But before we reach the Golden Age, before we see the great city of Chang'an lit up like 1,000 stars against the night sky, before we hear the music of the Silk Road and the chanting of Buddhist monks in mountain temples, we must go back to the very beginning. Every great story has a beginning, and this one begins in darkness. Close your eyes, if you haven't already. Take a slow breath in, and let it out, slowly, gently, like a leaf settling on still water. Imagine, if you will, a dark night. The year is 617. The sky is heavy with rain, not a violent storm, but a steady, persistent rain that seeps into everything. It seeps into the clothes of travelers. It seeps into the roofs of village huts. It seeps into the hearts of men, making them heavy and tired. The roads of northern China are thick with mud. The land is tired. For decades, the Sui dynasty has ruled with an iron fist. But that fist is now weak, trembling like an old man's hand. The emperor is lost in his own palace, surrounded by whispers and fear. The people are starving, the fields are empty. The granaries, once filled to the brim with rice and millet, are now hollow and dust-filled. And in the distance, you hear the sound of horses. Not many horses, just a few. Their hooves splash through the puddles, slow and steady. Their riders are men in armor, cold and wet, their breath forming small clouds in the chill air. They are riding toward a city called Taizong, where a duke waits for news. That duke is Li Yuan, and the story of the Tang Dynasty begins with him. But tonight, we will not rush. We will walk slowly through this story, step by step, moment by moment, like walking through a garden at dusk, like watching the moon rise over a still lake, like counting the raindrops on a window pane. There is no hurry, there is only the story, and your breath, and the slow, gentle passage of time. So settle in, find your comfort, pull the blanket up to your chin, rest your head upon your pillow, and let the rain carry you back to the end of an empire and the birth of a legend. Let us speak now of the Sui dynasty, the dynasty that came before the Tang. The Sui had been great once. The first emperor, Emperor Wen, had united the land after 300 years of division, 300 years of warring states, of shifting borders, of brothers fighting brothers. He had brought peace to a world that had forgotten what peace felt like. He had built canals that stretched across the country, silver ribbons, carrying grain from the fertile south to the hungry north. He had built granaries, massive storehouses of stone and timber, filled with enough rice to feed the cities through the harshest winters. He had tried to bring order to chaos. But power has a way of changing things. When Emperor Wen died, his son took the throne. His name was Yongwang, and history remembers him as Emperor Yong of Sui. He was a builder, like his father, but his ambitions were far too grand, far too reckless. Let us take a moment to imagine Emperor Yong. Picture a man in his 40s, handsome in his youth, but now growing heavy. His eyes are sharp, always searching, always calculating. He wears robes of the finest silk, embroidered with golden dragons that seem to writhe in the candlelight. He sits on a throne that is raised high above his court, so that everyone must look up to see him. He's a man who cannot sit still. His mind races with projects, with dreams, with visions of an empire so vast and so glorious that all the world would bow before it. He built a new capital city, Luoyang, with walls so high they seemed to touch the clouds. Workers were conscripted from every province. Men who had never left their villages were marched hundreds of miles to carry stones and mix mortar. Thousands died in the construction, some from exhaustion, some from disease, some from the whips of the overseers. Their bones were buried in the foundations of the walls, and the city rose on a bed of human suffering. He built the Grand Canal, a waterway longer than any in the world. connecting the Yellow River to the Yangtze. It was a marvel of engineering, a feat that would be remembered for 1,000 years. But it was built at a terrible cost. The canal was dug by the hands of millions of men, women, and even children, forced to work under the blazing sun and the freezing rain. The mud was thick and heavy, the work was endless, and those who could not keep up were simply left behind. And then, he turned his eyes northward. Beyond the Great Wall, there were nomads. The Turks, the two Jews. They rode on horseback and shot arrows from the saddle with deadly accuracy. They lived in felt tents and moved with the seasons. They were a constant threat to the northern border. Emperor Yong decided that he would crush them forever. He led 3 massive campaigns into their lands. Each time, he gathered an army of hundreds of thousands, so many soldiers that the dust from their march darkened the sky. Each time, he sent them across the barren steppes, where water was scarce and the cold was bitter. Each time, he returned with fewer men. The first campaign ended in disaster. The Turkish cavalry surrounded the emperor's army and cut off their supplies. Men starved, horses died. The emperor barely escaped with his life. The second campaign was more of the same. The Turks retreated deeper into the steppes, drawing the Sui army further and further from their supply lines. When winter came, thousands of soldiers froze to death in the snow. The third campaign was the worst. Emperor Yong personally led the army. He was determined to win, determined to prove that he was as great a general as he was a builder. But the Turks outmaneuvered him at every turn. They struck and vanished, like wolves snapping at the heels of a wounded bull. When the emperor finally turned back, more than half of his army was gone. The people began to whisper. They whispered that the emperor had lost the mandate of heaven, that divine favor had left him, that the gods had turned their faces away from his rule. And in the countryside, the whispers grew louder. They became shouts. They became the sound of swords being sharpened. Rivers flooded, crops failed, tax collectors came to villages where there was nothing left to take, no grain, no livestock, no coins hidden under the floorboards. Men who had once been farmers became bandits, roaming the roads with stolen weapons. Women and children wandered the highways, searching for food that was no longer there. The fields lay fallow, choked with weeds. The canals, once the pride of the empire, were clogged with silt and debris. The empire was crumbling, piece by piece, like a clay pot cracking in the sun. Cracks appeared in the walls of the capital. Cracks appeared in the loyalty of the governors. Cracks appeared in the hearts of the people. And it was in this world of dust and hunger, of despair and rebellion, that Li Yuan and his sons began to dream of something new. The second campaign was more of the same. The Turks retreated deeper into the steppes, drawing the Sui army further and further from their supply lines. When winter came, thousands of soldiers froze to death in the snow. The third campaign was the worst. Emperor Yong personally led the army. He was determined to win, determined to prove that he was as great a general as he was a builder. But the Turks outmaneuvered him at every turn. They struck and vanished, like wolves snapping at the heels of a wounded bull. When the emperor finally turned back, more than half of his army was gone. The people began to whisper. They whispered that the emperor had lost the mandate of heaven, that divine favor had left him, that the gods had turned their faces away from his rule. And in the countryside, the whispers grew louder. They became shouts. They became the sound of swords being sharpened. Rivers flooded, crops failed, tax collectors came to villages where there was nothing left to take, no grain, no livestock, no coins hidden under the floorboards. Men who had once been farmers became bandits, roaming the roads with stolen weapons. Women and children wandered the highways, searching for food that was no longer there. The fields lay fallow, choked with weeds. The canals, once the pride of the empire, were clogged with silt and debris. The empire was crumbling, piece by piece, like a clay pot cracking in the sun. Cracks appeared in the walls of the capital. Cracks appeared in the loyalty of the governors. Cracks appeared in the hearts of the people. And it was in this world of dust and hunger, of despair and rebellion, that Li Yuan and his sons began to dream of something new. Li Yuan was not a common man. He came from a family of generals, men who had served the northern dynasties with loyalty and honor. His grandfather had been a great commander. His father had been a governor. His ancestors had been given noble titles that passed from father to son, like heirlooms of silver and jade. His wife was from the powerful Dugu clan, a family so influential that even the emperor treated them with respect. She was a woman of strong will and sharp intelligence. She managed the household, raised the children, and offered counsel to her husband in the quiet hours of the night. She was the spine of the family. The silent strength behind the throne was yet to come. Li Yuan himself was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with a beard streaked with grey. His eyes were deep-set and watchful. He was not a man of quick decisions. He preferred to wait, to observe, to let the situation unfold before he acted. He was cautious by nature, some said to cautious. But caution, in times of chaos, can be a virtue. Li Yuan had 3 sons who would matter to history. The eldest was Li Yuan. He was born first, which meant everything in a society that valued the order of birth. He was steady, cautious, and favored by his father. He was the heir, the one who would inherit the title, the one who would lead the family when Li Yuan was gone. He was tall like his father, with a quiet dignity that made him seem older than his years. He was careful with his words, careful with his actions. He never took unnecessary risks. The second son was Li Shimin. He was different in every way. While Li Yuan was cautious, Li Shimin was bold. While Li Yuan studied books, Li Shimin studied warfare. While Li Yuan preferred the quiet of the study, Li Shimin preferred the open field, the wind in his face, the thunder of hooves. He rode horses before he could write his own name. By the age of 10, he could shoot an arrow from a gallop, a skill that took most men years to master. By the age of 15, he was riding into battle alongside his father. He had fire in his eyes, a fire that burned brighter than any lantern. He was hungry for glory, hungry for victory, hungry to prove that he was more than just a second son. The third son was Li Yuan. He was younger, born into the shadow of his 2 older brothers. He was a clever boy, quick with words and quicker with schemes. But he was also restless, always wanting more, always feeling like he had been given less than he deserved. He grew up watching his elder brothers receive the praise, the titles, the recognition, and in his heart, a bitterness took root. Imagine these 3 brothers, growing up in the same house, sharing the same meals, learning the same lessons from the same tutors. Imagine them as children, running through the courtyards of their father's mansion, playing games of tag and pretend. Li Yuan, the responsible eldest, keeping watch over his younger brothers. Li Shimin, the daring second son, always pushing the boundaries, always wanting to go further, faster. Li Yuan, the youngest, trailing behind, trying to keep up. In those early years, they were close, they were brothers. They loved each other in the way that children love, fiercely, unquestioningly. But as they grew older, the seeds of rivalry were being planted. The soil was being prepared for a harvest of blood. In 616, Li Yuan was appointed the Duke of Tang and given command of Taizong, a garrison city in the north. It was a military post, far from the capital, far from the intrigue of the court. It was meant to be a place of exile, a way for the emperor to keep a powerful general away from the center of power. But Li Yuan was no fool. He saw what was happening to the Sui dynasty. He saw the chaos spreading like a stain across the map. He saw rebellion after rebellion rising up, and he saw the emperor's power slipping through his fingers like grains of sand. And he began to wonder, what if the house of Li could do more than just serve? What if, they could rule. In 617, the moment arrived. The Sui emperor was in the south, hiding from the rebellion that was swallowing his empire. The roads were cut, the armies were scattered. The throne was empty. It was a vacuum, and vacuums in history, always filled by the bold. Li Yuan sat in Taiyuan, with his two eldest sons, staring at a map of China. The map was spread across a low wooden table. Candles flickered at each corner, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The night was cold, and outside, the wind howled like a hungry wolf. Li Jiancheng, the eldest, spoke first. He said, "Father, it is too dangerous. If we rise up and fail, our entire family will be executed. Every cousin, every nephew, every child. The Sui will not show mercy. We have a good position here. We are safe. Let us wait and see what happens." But Li Shimin, the second son, shook his head. He stepped forward, his eyes bright with passion. He said, "Father, if we do not rise up, we will die anyway. The empire is already lost. The rebels will tear it apart, piece by piece. We have an army. We have a city. We have a name that people trust. People look to us for leadership. If we hesitate, if we wait too long, someone else will seize the throne. And then we will be nothing. We will be swept aside like fallen leaves." He paused, and his voice grew quieter, more intense. "Father, I have seen the suffering of the people. I have ridden through villages where there are no men left, only women and children huddled in the ruins of their homes. I have seen fields that should be green with rice, brown and dead. The Sui has failed. The people need someone new. They need us." Li Yuan listened to both his sons. He listened to the caution of the eldest and the fire of the second. He weighed their words in his mind, like a merchant weighing gold and silver. And in the end, he made his choice. He gathered his troops in the courtyard of his fortress. The night was cold, and the stars were hidden behind thick clouds. Torches burned in the darkness, their flames reaching up like fingers toward the sky. The soldiers stood in ranks, their armor glinting in the firelight. Their breath formed small clouds in the chill air. Li Yuan climbed onto a wooden platform. He was wearing his finest armor, polished until it shone. His sword hung at his side. His face was calm, but his heart was beating fast. He spoke of the suffering of the people. He spoke of the corruption of the court. He spoke of the emperor's failures, the failed campaigns, the wasted lives, the empty granaries. He spoke of a new beginning, a new dynasty that would bring peace back to the land. And then, he raised his sword high above his head. The blade caught the torchlight and seemed to burn with its own fire. He declared that he was no longer the Duke of Tang serving the Sui. He was the Duke of Tang, declaring a new age, a new dynasty, a new world. The soldiers cheered. Their voices rose into the night like the sound of thunder. They raised their own weapons and shouted their loyalty. The sound echoed off the walls of the fortress and carried across the plains, a promise of things to come. But history is not always as clean as we imagine. Li Yuan did not march on the capital. That very night, he waited, he watched. He played a delicate game of chess with the other rebel leaders. He sent gifts to the nomads in the north to keep them neutral. He wrote letters to the Sui emperor, pretending to be loyal, while sharpening his sword in secret. Li Shimin, his second son, was his most valuable soldier. In the years that followed, he would prove himself again and again on the battlefield. Let us follow him for a moment. Imagine the battlefield. The dust is thick in the air. The sun is low in the sky, casting long shadows across the field. The enemy army is lined up on the opposite hill, their banners fluttering in the wind. Li Shimin sits on his horse, at the head of his cavalry. He's young still, in his early 20s, but his face is set in an expression of calm determination. He raises his arm, and his men fall silent. They wait for his command. He looks at the enemy. He looks at his own soldiers. He takes a slow breath. and then he lowers his arm. The cavalry charges. The ground shakes beneath the weight of hundreds of hooves. Li Shimin is at the front, his sword drawn, his eyes fixed on the enemy line. The wind whips past his face. The noise is deafening, the thunder of hooves, the clash of metal, the shouts of men. In one battle, his horse is struck by an arrow. It stumbles and falls, throwing Li Shimin to the ground. He lands hard, the wind knocked out of him. The enemy soldiers see him fall and rush forward, swords raised, thinking they have killed the prince. Li Shimin is not dead. He rolls to his feet, drawing his sword. His face is streaked with mud and blood. He charges forward, directly into the enemy. His men see his courage and rally around him. They fight with renewed fury, and the enemy breaks and flees. Li Shimin stands in the middle of the battlefield, breathing hard, surrounded by the bodies of his enemies. He raises his sword to the sky and shouts his victory. He is becoming a hero. And his brother, Li Yuan, watches him with narrowing eyes. The rebellion succeeded, but it was not a single battle. It was a series of campaigns, fought over months and years. Li Shimin led the armies through the eastern plains, defeating warlords who had thought themselves invincible. He marched through the northern valleys, bringing the nomads to heel. He crossed the rivers of the south, where the water was so wide that the shores seemed like two different worlds. Each victory brought more territory under the control of the Li family. Each victory added to the legend of Li Shimin, the second son who could not be stopped. And in 618, the year that would change everything, Li Yuan entered the city of Chang'an. Imagine that moment. The city gates swing open. The streets are lined with people, hundreds of them, thousands of them. They stand in silence, watching the procession pass. The soldiers march in perfect formation, their armor polished, their banners held high. The horses are adorned with silken bells that chime with each step. And in the center of the procession, Li Yuan rides on a white horse. He wears robes of purple and gold, the colors of royalty. His face is calm, but his eyes are full of wonder. He's entering the city that will become his capital, the heart of his new dynasty. The Shui emperor is dead, killed by his own guards in a moment of panic and betrayal. The throne is empty. The great hall of the palace is silent, waiting for someone to sit upon the dragon seat. Li Yuan dismounts from his horse. He walks up the steps of the palace, his footsteps echoing in the vast courtyard. He enters the hall, and the officials bow low before him. The incense burners send up spirals of fragrant smoke, wrapping around him like a blessing. And there, before the assembled court, Li Yuan declares himself the first emperor of the Tang Dynasty. He takes the throne named Guozu, the High Ancestor. The Tang Dynasty has officially begun, but the victory was not clean. The empire was still divided. There were other warlords, other armies, other men who wanted the dragon throne for themselves. Some of them had once been allies of the Li family. Now they were enemies. The rebellion had created a vacuum, and vacuums in history are filled by those who are willing to fight for power. Li Yuan, now Emperor Guozu, had to spend his first years on the throne fighting to keep it. And who did he send to fight those battles? His second son, Li Shimin. Year after year, Li Shimin rode out from Chang'an at the head of armies. Year after year, he returned covered in dust and glory. He conquered the eastern plains, where the warlord Dojongdi had gathered a massive force. He defeated the northern tribes, who had been raiding the border villages. He brought province after province under Tang control. The people of Chang'an began to speak of Li Shimin as the greatest general of the age. They told stories of his bravery, his cunning, his unwavering resolve. They said he was invincible. They said he was blessed by the gods. Meanwhile, Li Yuan, the eldest son, remained in the capital. He was the crown prince, the heir to the throne. He attended the court, received the ministers, and performed the ceremonial duties expected of him. But the throne was not a quiet place. The court was full of whispers, full of people who wondered, who will be the next emperor? The cautious eldest son, or the brilliant second son? Li Yuan knew his brother was a threat. He could see it in the eyes of the ministers, hear it in the whispers of the courtiers. He knew that his brother's victories on the battlefield made him look weak in comparison, and so he began to work against him. He gathered advisors, clever men with sharp tongues and sharp minds. He listened to their counsel and began to spread rumors. He whispered to his father that Li Shimin was too ambitious, too hungry for power. He suggested that Li Shimin might be planning to seize the throne for himself. The third brother, Li Yuan, sided with Li Yuancheng. He was tired of being the overlooked son, the one who received only the scraps of power. He saw an opportunity to advance his own position by supporting the crown prince. Together, the two brothers began to plot against Li Shimin. They watched him, they listened to his conversations. They looked for any sign of disloyalty, any misstep that could be used against him. And Li Shimin heard the whispers. He knew what his brothers were doing. He could feel the noose tightening around his neck. But he did not strike back, not yet. He waited, he watched. He listened to the sound of the rain on the roof of his mansion, and he wondered when the storm would break. The tension grew day by day. Li Shimin knew that his brothers were plotting against him. He had spies in their households, servants who reported their conversations, their movements, their plans. He knew that Li Yuancheng had proposed to his father that Li Shimin be stripped of his military command and sent to a distant province, a form of exile that would remove him from power forever. But Li Yuancheng wanted more than exile. He wanted Li Shimin dead. One evening, an invitation arrived at Li Shimin's mansion. It was an invitation to a feast at the crown prince's residence. Li Yuancheng and Li Yuan were hosting a banquet in honor of their brother. They said it was a gesture of goodwill, a reconciliation. They said they wanted to put the past behind them and move forward as a united family. Li Shimin read the invitation and felt a chill run down his spine. He knew his brothers. He knew they were not the type to offer goodwill without a hidden motive. He discussed the invitation with his closest advisors, men who had fought alongside him, men who had bled with him, men who would die for him. They urged him not to go. It is a trap, they said. They will kill you. But Li Shimin shook his head. If I refuse, he said, they will tell my father that I am hostile, that I am unwilling to make peace. It will give them the excuse they need to move against me. I must go. I must show that I am not afraid. And so he went. The feast was held in a grand hall in the crown prince's palace. The walls were hung with silk tapestries, and the tables were laden with dishes of roasted meat, steamed fish, and fresh fruit. The candles burned bright, casting a warm glow over the gathered guests. Li Yuancheng welcomed his brother with a smile. Sit, sit, he said. Let us drink together, as brothers should. Li Yuan also smiled, but his smile did not reach his eyes. The wine was poured. Li Yuancheng raised his cup and made a toast. To the Tang Dynasty, he said. May it last 1,000 years. Li Shimin raised his own cup. He hesitated. The wine was clear, the color of amber. He brought it to his lips and drank. The moment the liquid touched his throat, he felt it. It was a burning sensation, sharp and immediate. It spread down his chest like fire. He felt his face flush, his stomach clench. He knew, in that instant, that he had been poisoned. He set down his cup. His hands were trembling. He tried to speak, but his voice came out as a croak. He excused himself, saying that he was unwell. His brothers watched him leave, their faces unreadable. Li Shimin stumbled out of the hall and into the night air. He made his way to his horse, clutching his stomach. He rode back to his own mansion, barely able to stay in the saddle. His physicians were summoned. They examined him and declared that he had been poisoned. They gave him antidotes, herbs and powders mixed with warm water. They bled him and applied poultices to his chest. 4 days. He hovered between life and death. He was weak, feverish, unable to eat. His wife stayed by his bedside, holding his hand, whispering prayers. But he survived. He survived the poison that was meant to kill him. And when he finally regained his strength, he understood, in that moment, that his brothers would not stop until he was dead. They had tried to kill him. They would try again. It was either him or them. He gathered his most trusted advisors in his study. The room was lit by a single candle. Their faces were cast in shadow and light. They spoke in low voices, sharing their fears and their plans. Li Shimin looked at each of them in turn. "My brothers have tried to kill me," he said. "They will try again. I cannot wait for them to strike first. I must act, but I need to know, are you with me?" One by one, his men swore their loyalty. They would follow him to the gates of hell itself. They would fight for him, bleed for him, die for him. Li Shimin nodded. He had made his choice. The date was July 2nd, 626. The place was the Zhuanwu Gate, the northern gate of the imperial palace in Chang'an. In the darkness before dawn, Li Shimin gathered his most trusted men. They were not many, just a few dozen, but they were warriors who had fought alongside him for years. They had seen him bleed. They had seen him triumph. They trusted him with their lives. They assembled in the shadows of the Great Wall, their armor muffled by layers of cloth to keep the sound of metal from betraying them. The torches along the wall had been extinguished. The guards had been bribed or replaced. Everything was in place. Li Shimin spoke to his men in a low voice, so low that they had to lean in to hear him. "Today," he said, "I must do what I must do. I do not want this. I never wanted this, but my brothers have left me no other choice. If I die, my family dies, my children die, my friends die. Everyone who has stood with me will be executed. I will not let that happen. I will not let them win." He paused. His voice was thick with emotion. "I am sorry that it has come to this, but it has. So let us end it today." He positioned his men around the gate. They hid in the shadows of the walls, their weapons covered by the darkness. They waited. They breathed slowly, counting the beats of their hearts. Then, as the sun began to rise, Li Jiancheng and Li Yuan approached the gate. They were on horseback, surrounded by their own guards. They were heading to the court to meet with their father. They did not know that Li Shimin had already entered the palace through a side gate. They did not know that his men were waiting in the shadows. They passed through the outer gates. The Zhuanwu Gate loomed ahead of them. It was a massive structure, built of stone and timber, with a great archway that could accommodate a dozen horsemen riding side by side. As they entered the gate, the portcullis began to lower behind them slowly, silently, but with finality. The gate slammed shut. Li Shimin stepped forward. His face was stone. His eyes were cold. He raised his bow and aimed at his older brother. His hands were steady. He did not hesitate. He had been waiting for this moment for years. Li Jiancheng saw the arrow too late. He tried to turn his horse, tried to raise his shield. But the arrow was already in the air. It struck him in the chest. He gasped and fell from the saddle, his body landing with a heavy thud on the stone pavement. His horse reared and galloped away. Li Yuanji, the third brother, saw his elder brother fall and tried to escape. He was young and fast, and he almost made it. But Li Shimin's men closed in. They surrounded him, swords flashing in the morning light. He fought back, desperate and terrified. But there were too many of them. He was cut down, his body collapsing beside that of his brother. The battle lasted only a few minutes. When it was over, the ground was stained red. The two princes lay dead at the gate of the palace. Their guards had been killed or had fled. The morning sun was rising over the walls, casting long shadows across the scene. Li Shimin stood among the bodies. He was breathing hard. His bow was still in his hand. His eyes were wide, staring at the bodies of his brothers. He had done it. He had killed them. He had ended the rivalry with blood and steel. But there was no triumph in his face, only sorrow. A deep, aching sorrow that would stay with him for the rest of his life. His men came to him, bowed, and called him the victor. He did not hear them. He was looking at the face of his eldest brother, cold and still. He was looking at the face of his youngest brother, frozen in a mask of terror. He remembered them as children, running through the courtyards, playing games. He remembered the sound of their laughter, and he knew that he would never hear that laughter again. His father, Emperor Gaozu, was in the palace. When the news arrived, he was shocked. He had lost sons who had been murdered by the third. He was overwhelmed with grief, with anger, with confusion. He called for his ministers and demanded answers, but he was also a practical man. He knew that Li Shimin had the army. He knew that Li Shimin had the support of the generals. He knew that, if he tried to punish his second son, he might lose the throne entirely. So he summoned Li Shimin to his chambers. The old emperor and the young prince looked at each other across the room. The silence stretched between them like a river. Emperor Gaozu spoke first. He was trembling, but his voice was steady. "You have killed your brothers," he said, "your own flesh and blood. Do you understand what you have done?" Li Shimin bowed his head. His voice was quiet, barely above a whisper. "I understand, Father. I understand that I have done something that cannot be undone. I understand that I have blood on my hands that will never wash clean. But I also understand that they would have killed me. They tried to poison me. They tried to have me exiled. They gave me no choice." He raised his head and met his father's eyes. "I did not want this, but it is done. Now, we must move forward. The people need a strong emperor. The empire needs a steady hand. I am asking you to step aside. Father, let me rule. Let me do what I was born to do." Emperor Gaozu looked at his son for a long moment. Then he nodded, slowly, heavily. 2 months later, Emperor Gaozu abdicated the throne. He stepped down, leaving the crown to Li Shimin, who would rule as Emperor Taizong, the supreme ancestor. So, that is how the second emperor of the Tang Dynasty came to power. Not through love, not through peace, but through blood and fire. Li Shimin became Emperor Taizong at the age of 27. He was young, ambitious, and haunted by what he had done. For the rest of his life, he would carry the weight of that morning at the Zhuangwu Gate. He would see his brothers' faces in his dreams. He would write poetry about guilt and loss. But he would also become one of the greatest emperors in Chinese history. He would build a new Chang'an, a city of order and beauty. He would welcome travelers from Persia and India and Arabia. He would send his armies to the edges of the earth and bring peace to the borders. He would listen to wise advisors like Wei Zheng, who would tell him when he was wrong. He would become the Chaka and the heavenly ruler of all the people under the sky. But that story is for another night. For now, the rain has stopped. The dawn is breaking over Chang'an. The city is waking up slowly, like a sleeper turning over in bed. The market will open soon, and the merchants will spread out their goods: silks from the east, spices from the west, jade and silver and porcelain. The children will run through the streets, laughing and shouting. The monks will chant in the temples, their voices rising like incense smoke to the heavens. And you can rest now. The story of the Tang Dynasty has just begun. But tonight, you have heard enough. Let your breath slow down. Let your shoulders drop. Let your mind drift away like a boat on a quiet river. Let the images fade, the battles, the feasts, the blood, the tears, all of it fading into the soft light of morning.